Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for tuning in. John Kelly, profiler, and welcome. Welcome to a special viewer's choice show today. And we have members of the STALK team, and we have a very special guest that I'll introduce soon. I can't thank you enough for tuning us in. Today's viewer's choice special is on Chris Watts. Chris Watts is a family annihilator. That means he killed everybody in his family except himself. He didn't do that, which a lot of family annihilators do. They commit suicide after they kill the rest of the family, but not Chris. Okay. Chris killed his pregnant wife, Shannon, and his two children, his two beautiful daughters, Bella and Celeste. This is a very, very sad story. In August 2018 in Friedrich, Colorado. Now, what we're going to try to do today is find out what is wrong with this guy's mind. I mean, what went on in this guy's mind that caused him to do this? Because certainly there were hardly any, at least that none that I could pick up, warning signs before he committed this horrific act. And again, most family annihilators kill themselves, not this guy. No, he's ready to go out and have an affair. Let me introduce the team. Okay, we have Dr. Eddie Mirsky. He is a doctor of psychology. Okay, that's as pure as you can get as far as psychology goes. He is a doctor of psychology. Then we have Frank Adamson. Frank Adamson was the commander of detectives for King County out in Washington, the state of Washington. Frank Adamson led the Green River Task Force. And I give him all the credit in the world, along with members of the Green River Task Force, alive and dead. I mean, they deserve it. Frank Adamson was the longest running member, longest running leader of the Green River Task Force for many, many years. And, he brought home the bacon. What I mean by that is they grabbed the DNA early, they held on to it for 20 years. And they ended up catching the Green River Killer, who was Gary Ridgway, somebody they were onto from the beginning, but didn't have enough proof. Also, our special guest today is Marianne Glynn. Marianne Glynn is a clinical social worker. She's a psychotherapist. She's in Central New Jersey. She has an unbelievable practice that focuses on not only general mental health issues, but her specialty and why she's with us today. And we're very, very appreciative of having Marianne on with us today. I mean, she's really, as far as I'm concerned, the best in her field. Her specialty is working with the spouses of abusive narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths. So we want Marianne, to help us today to get inside the mind of Chris Watts and figure out why this guy annihilated his whole family, and maybe she can help us understand or identify some warning signs that might have been going on that we just can't understand or we've missed. And I know a lot of you out there have been very concerned about these warning signs. So, with that all being said, one other thing. Marianne is so passionate about her work and dealing with the spouses, the abused spouses, in these destructive relationships, that she opened up a website. And the name of that website is destructiverelationshipshelp.com. That is destructiverelationshipshelp.com. Marianne Glynn at destructiverelationshipshelp.com. All words together. All right. So if anybody out there is in a destructive relationship and would like to contact Marianne, she'd be more than happy to help you. So with that being said, I guess we need to move on. Is there anything else I've missed? All right, then let's go. Okay, we've got Chris Watts' family annihilator, killing his family, two beautiful children, a wife that's pregnant, takes the wife, puts the wife in a ditch in an area where he works. He works for an oil company and like an oil field, I guess it is. And then he takes the two children and puts them in tanks. Like each tank was like 400 gallons of oil or something in those tanks. So he tried to hide the bodies of this family in where he worked in the oil field, in the oil tanks, and his wife in a shallow grave. I mean, Frank, you have seen murders before. I mean, from a law enforcement perspective, I mean, how does this affect a policeman or anybody from law enforcement when they have a case like this? I mean, how did, if you can remember back to your cases that we talked about, how did this affect you?
Well, I think it was absolutely terrible. What he did to those young children is unforgivable. And when I think about him, I think about a book that I read some time ago. It was a kind of a tome, and the author was Dr. Stanton Samanow, and he was talking about the personality of criminals at the time. And what he said in this book is that these people essentially um, wrong think. And if you think about the crime that this particular person perpetrated, everything about it was wrong. I mean, he couldn't get away with it. He's stupid. He goes to a polygraph, takes a polygraph when the police suggest it, and obviously he fails because he did it. And you can see that he isn't really going to get away with this, but for whatever wrong reason, he went ahead and killed his family rather than simply divorced his wife and went on with his life. That's not what he did. And so, usually in a situation similar to this, um, the perpetrator kills the family and kills himself. One night when I was in command duty on the department, we had two different family annihilations in one night. Um, in one particular case, the perpetrator first killed the mother and father of his wife in a different county. Then he came back home, killed his wife, and killed himself. In the other case, the person simply killed his whole family um, in one location. And I see an extreme selfishness in what occurred here, and I guess that's pretty much how I view this crime.
Dr. Reddy, how do you see this? I mean, you were shaking your head when Frank mentioned the book and I guess the person that wrote the book or the therapist that wrote the book or was in the book. I mean, wrong thinking. I mean, like Frank talked about this guy being stupid. I mean, just being impulsive. I mean, how do you see it? What do you say? Or say whatever you like.
Yeah, well, he certainly did a lot of wrong things, right from the get-go. And, we know even the neighbor had a camera, that was panning the whole area. And apparently he knew that. So he's carrying bodies out at different times. And, there's a lot of uh, not well thought out, not well conceived, I guess. If you want to talk about his personality, is he, is a nature nurture? Is he a born?
Frank running.
Or did his early development contribute to how he behaved, what he did? Interesting questions. Usually it's a combination. I don't know much about his family background, but I think that would be pretty interesting. What were his relationship with his family, um, his formative relationships. I would suspect we would find a lot of defects and deficiencies um, in his developmental years. But I don't, he's probably going to be interviewed in prison. He's going to be there quite a while, so we'll have a chance to get into his psyche a little bit more. But yeah, like Frank said, it is hard to believe that he could think he could get away with it. Just very, even the least intelligent criminal would probably do a little better job than he did. So, but
Yeah.
we'll a little more later. Yeah, no, we'll get into some of the characteristics of people who tend to do these kind of things. I mean, obviously, thank God it's very rare. Family annihilators it's a very rare phenomenon, thank God. But they do happen. The most famous case, of course, in New Jersey was John List, going back many years, where he took it upon himself to play God and wiped out his whole family. And he was, I guess, more unique, and he didn't kill himself. He went on to remarry and be an accountant and lived another 20, 25 years before he got caught.
Yeah, very, very famous case. You're right about Chris Watts going into prison. We went in there in probably a very expensive police van, and he's going to be coming out of there in about at some point in a $20 rubber bag, because you're right, he's not ever leaving that prison. Okay, as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, he got a number of life sentences, I think, and he's not leaving there alive. I mean, this is a man who did some of the worst evil things I've ever heard of. Marianne, what's your take on Chris Watts,
Well,
personality wise and everything?
well, he's definitely narcissistic, and I don't know what you guys think, but I think all psychopaths have narcissism. In other words, they internally they maintain kind of a good self-image of themselves. They have to maintain this kind of blameless, flawless image that they probably believe and present to the world. In his case, and even though it's not outwardly maybe obvious, in his case, it seemed like everything was going good in his life up until a point, right? Whatever happened to him, I mean, I agree with you, Ed, that there had to be some abuse, something that happened in his early childhood for him to do what he did, and probably something in his biology. He was very kind of flat, cold, emotionless kind of person. But while for guys like him, it seems like if things can go well in their life, if things feel in control, they have a marriage, his beautiful wife, children. He seemed to actually enjoy the role of parent. He spent a lot of time. That seemed to be easy, fluid for him. And that's often, and, they had a house, they had goals, this and that. He had a wife who made good money. But at some point in any marriage, as if you've been married, you know this, that kind of will crack, the kind of honeymoon period or when things are going good. And inevitably, and this is normal and healthy, you get to a point where, you start having conflict and, disillusionment. And if you're a healthy enough individual, you talk about these things, you take some responsibility for it. You look at yourself. You have to have some humility and self-honesty. You have to have some conscience, right, in order to get through a conflict and look at yourself. And you have to have empathy, right, in order to put yourself in your spouse's place, so that you can get to the end of this, have more understanding of each other, and then kind of reconnect and rebond. But for somebody who is narcissistic, in other words, they're very defended. They aren't able to look at themselves. They aren't able to take responsibility and see anything negative inside of themselves. The marriage relationship inevitably is going to become threatening to that, right? And so instead of having the ability to resolve any of these conflicts and make things better, they usually tend to just start building resentment. Because they're not getting kind of the positive affirmation, the good feelings from their spouse anymore, or other things, stresses that come in on their life. And so they might start to just kind of maybe internally a little bit start to feel uncomfortable, break down, start to maybe become angry and blame it on their wife. And it seems like in this case, and it's very common with narcissistic spouses or psychopathic spouses, to seek that affirmation or good feeling somewhere else, outside of the marriage. They tend to do a lot of cheating, most of them. And so that's what he did. And then this almost, it seems like, became an obsession. He was he almost, the whole feeling almost seemed to me like it had a little bit of a panicky desperateness to it. And he became very infatuated with this Nicole, and with the idea of kind of reinventing or rewriting his history. Like he's going to now, instead of whatever would happen here and an impending divorce even, that may have been happening. There was some debt. They had some debt going on, and a potential divorce. So instead of all that, it seems to me like in his mind, he wanted to kind of erase it. Kind of just, he couldn't tolerate possibly the failure of the marriage, how people might look at him, or maybe how his children even might look at him, or just that it didn't all feel good to him. So he kind of wanted to just kind of wipe it out, start over, reinvent his life, and go back to feeling good.
Yeah, and I totally agree with this. And we're going to stop here, but we're going to pick it up in a minute because you really hit the nail on the head. What was his fantasy? Talking about reinventing himself, talking about the new relationship. What was he fantasizing? We'll be right back. All right, we are back, and something Marianne brought out, something I want to go over is what was this guy's fantasy? Marianne was talking about him building a new life, reconstructing a new life, or however you brought it out, but starting anew, starting anew. So is this guy intoxicated with the fantasy of this new relationship to the point, that he's going to kill his two children, his unborn child and his wife? I mean, Eddie, why don't we start with you here? I mean, how intoxicated is he into this fantasy that he would do something like this?
Well, I guess it's pretty obvious he was very deeply into this fantasy. Yeah, he had, sometimes we call it like dichotomous reasoning, where he almost compartmentalized these different parts of his life. He said his life with the wife and the kids, and I guess there were some complications. Things were going south a little bit, but he said he didn't want to, a mature adult would sit down, discuss things, maybe not resolve everything immediately, of course, but you sit down and you go over issues. And I think there's always a better way than murder to resolve whatever the issues were, the financial issues, if the the sex life was not as good as it used to be. The honeymoon phase, as Marianne said, might have been waning. But yeah, his fantasy was I can somehow just erase my whole prior life and have this whole new great life, start all over again. And in his disturbed mind, nobody would even know. Nobody's going to catch it. No one's going to find out. That was his plan, certainly, but backfired very quickly. I think most murderers, what they make like 10 mistakes or something on average, or with the clues that they leave behind. He left quite a few. I mean, I think they were onto him right from the get-go. So his whole fantasy was dashed pretty quickly. Did he have the fantasy? Yes. And that we know our imaginations, our fantasies, it starts at a very young age. As children, certainly we live in a lot of fantasy world, but I guess for some adults, they create a strong fantasy even as adults and try to fulfill it. But obviously, most people don't choose annihilation and murder to fulfill that fantasy.
Yeah, those fantasy can be very, very seductive. I mean, there's no question about that. But to the point of annihilating your whole family and this whole thing with the narcissism, we know Marianne's brought that up. It's like, we've talked about it before among ourselves. And, it's just these narcissists are so much smarter than everybody else. They're going to outsmart everybody and nobody's going to catch them. I mean, this guy was as dumb as a rock. Frank, you brought that up earlier about some of the mistakes and him being stupid and everything. Eddie's talking about some of the mistakes that he made and something about an average of so many mistakes a criminal makes or something like that. Do you have anything to add to that, to the, various, you did bring up some various mistakes right in the beginning, but anything else to add to that or to what Eddie just said or anything that Mariana said?
Well, actually, from a layperson's point of view, when I looked at that video and it seemed like he, was having a wonderful time with his kids and that he really loved them, he jumps out of that. To me, his life was disintegrating. He's going to go back and live with his parents. He doesn't have any uh, wealth or money to, take care of this family. So he jumps out of that relationship into another relationship thinking that, things are going to be better. And of course, they're not going to be.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, but the fantasy is soothing. The fantasy is like a get high. You know what I mean? Like as long as I stay in my fantasy, I don't have to deal with reality. And dreams can come true. Fantasies can happen. We know that from all the serial killers we've been after and how they're always into the fantasy. You know what I mean? Because it's a feel good spot for them. You know what I mean? And they don't have to deal with their hellish, shitty kind of reality. And
And the other thing too is the financial piece, right? Because there's possibly life insurance, no need for a divorce, and what that would imply financially. I mean, at the end of it, if his plan had worked, he comes out with everything, right? And no blame. I mean, he looks like the pitiable poor widower and victim of crime, right?
I looked into that because we were looking for motive, right? So anyway, this guy, and I hope the viewers please correct us if we're wrong, because I know there's been people following this case a lot longer than we have, and I can only go by the research I've looked at. But it looked like this guy had $3 taken out of his pay for life insurance. Okay. And that life insurance, it seems, was for the two daughters, right? And for his wife. Okay. So it looks like he had insurance on his wife and on his two daughters. He had no insurance on himself. Now, keep in mind, this guy's got a mortgage. This guy's already been been bankrupt, worked his way out of bankrupt. They got this home, okay? So, I mean, he's willing enough to go and get insurance on her and on the two kids, but he doesn't get insurance on himself. Now, is that kind of a sign right there, that things aren't kosher? Something smells here. Because every one of us know for sure we're going to die. I mean, that's just the bottom line. Okay? And if you care about your family and you realize you're going to die, you're going to get life insurance on yourself.
Sure.
Not this guy. Here comes that narcissism. Not this guy. Mm-mm. This guy is going to get it on everybody but himself. And I could be wrong. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But I don't think so. I think I got this right. And I'm just wondering if that was a sign. Something else, Marianne, you mentioned about being blameless. I see this guy as a non-confronter. I don't think this guy could have an argument or a decent spiritual debate, not spiritual, but spirited debate with anybody because he is so scared of being wrong or being a blame. So he keeps it all inside and everything's fine and everything's beautiful and but the rage is building and building and building and building. And then all of a sudden, bang, it comes out. Does anybody have anything else to say on that or anything until we move on to the next segment?
I would, yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, it's kind of like they externalize blame and, kind of project it onto their spouse, right? If they're unhappy, it's because, she's being a bitch or she's complaining or whatever, even just normal marital stuff would be very like threatening because they don't want to really look at themselves or get, any negative feedback about themselves. So then, it all gets projected onto the wife. Now I've had, I work with women and men actually who've been in long-term relationships with people who have the same, almost very similar psychology to Chris Watts, but in the end maybe didn't kill. However, I've had people who told me that they were poisoned by their spouse and their spouse was hunting them to find them and kill them, and others who've been afraid of being killed. But what more normally happens in these situations is that abuse starts to happen, and it's not necessarily physical violence, but it's emotional abuse. So could you imagine being with a person like Chris Watts? You have some kind of issue or problem and you try to talk about it, you're going to get them to either they're going to flip it around and start criticizing you, emotionally manipulating. They're going to exit and cheat or have some other secret thing life going on, addiction sometimes, and they're going to be angry at the wife anytime they get challenged or anything makes them uncomfortable. It becomes like this ongoing cycle of emotional abuse where the spouse eventually has to conform their behavior, sometimes becomes isolated, becomes usually a nervous wreck, and they start to break down. I won't go into all of that. It's almost like being in a chronic PTSD. But that's how it usually plays out. But sometimes it'll play out where the narcissistic mask, like in Chris Watts' case, will just stay up for a long time, and then they blow. And then somehow, and the wife or the husband will say, I don't know what happened. Everything was going just fine. There was no signs of problem. There was no aggression or anything that seemed to be wrong. We weren't even fighting. But suddenly they've left with someone else and they've abandoned their children and they have a new life. So that happens sometimes too. So in one form or another, that they break down and either become some kind of ongoing abusive thing with deceit or, in this case, killing or or abandoning. That makes sense?
It makes absolute perfect sense. Let's hold it right there, and we're going to be coming back. I want to talk more about this narcissistic mask and what we call it, the mask of sanity. We'll be right back. Hey guys, the one thing we were just talking about here, and I think it's really, really important. Mary Ann called it a narcissistic mask. We've been calling it a mask of sanity. Mary Ann, do you want to start and talk a little bit about that?
About the need, why there is a need for a mask, or how it works.
Yeah, either way, or both, and also, yeah, we'll talk about the abuse later on because you were saying usually emotional abuse is the first thing you start to see. Okay. In fact, why don't you incorporate that in what you have to say? You can incorporate the mask if you want to, or if not, we can wait till later and do it. Or, we just focus right now on the narcissistic mask and not the abuse. Up to you how you want to interweave it is fine.
Maybe it would help to kind of talk about how somebody, a narcissist, narcissist, psychopath, most of the time I kind of see them almost the same. It's the same kind of structure. It's like a callous, unemotional person without conscience, right? It's just I think it's a manner of degree on a spectrum, how bad or how cold they can be, or what lines they'd be willing to cross. So in a relationship, people like this, they come on with all mask, kind of. They usually come on very intensely. They sometimes call that love bombing, like you would see in a cult, like very intensely, almost mesmerizing, very sexually seductive, and creating an intense attachment with their partner that isn't really a true bond, but it's just very intense, and the person feels very drawn in. They're very good at reading people. They almost have like a sixth sense for kind of understanding what's needed to get this person, to kind of be, a good, like be chosen by this person. And they can kind of intuit that and become that, and it can become like this whirling, sweeping off your feet type of romance. And so that's who the partner thinks this person is, and they can uphold that as long as they're getting what they want and getting the feedback and the affirmation that they want, and everything feels in control, right? So that would be the mask, and I guess that can be upheld for so long until, like we said, it just the reality of a marriage, the work of a marriage, the reality of a marriage starts to hit home. And that's when you're going to start finding abuse. The mask starts to slip down, and you get another person coming out.
Yeah, like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Exactly.
The other thing I wanted to ask you was, do you see this narcissism really coming out in this passive aggressive anger, or just outright physical anger? You see it coming out when kids start to be born and the wife's attention starts to be taken off the husband and put onto the kids where it's supposed to be.
Often that happens, yes. Yes, and most of these guys are not, don't they don't seem to be good parents. They're into parenting. A few of them are, like Chris Watts was one of the guys who really kind of enjoyed the role of parent.
Yeah,
But of
how
course,
could you?
narcissists see people as an extension of themselves, so there's no threat there. It feels good, nothing bad yet. And so they can be good parents sometimes.
Yeah, I was going to say, a guy like this, how's he into his kids if he's into himself so much? He's got so much time for himself. What's left for his family and his kids? He's a strange guy. This guy was a strange guy, and that's why we're talking about it. A lot of people are really interested. This is what we're talking about. What do you see, Eddie? What do you say?
Well, I agree with everything Marianne said. Narcissism is it's more prevalent than we think. Hate to say it, but even our president certainly has been accused more than once of having many narcissistic trends, and here he is, the president, leader of the world. But a lot of his decisions and behaviors are, he could say, guided by his psychiatric diagnosis. So
I don't want to go off into politics here, Dr. Eddy.
Yeah,
okay.
I know it's a pretty a clear example that we see every day. So if people want to get a good description of that condition. I don't know if this is a good time now, but I did make a real short list of all the what we call the key characteristics that people should look at in a potential partner. And that's everybody who's in a relationship, thinking of being in a relationship. It's good to have some kind of guidelines, and I think Marianne has brought out most of them already, but I'll real quickly. The first one is non-defensiveness. A person who's open to feedback and discussion of issues without reacting with aggression or avoidance.
This is Mr. Right. This is Mr. Right or Miss Right. This is the ideal partner relationship. Yep. Okay, great. Okay, then we'll come to Mr. Wrong later and Mrs. Wrong. Go ahead.
Yeah, and number 2 on the list is honesty and integrity. Very important. Number 3 on the list, respect for others' boundaries, priorities, and goals separate from oneself. Okay, that's number 3. Number 4, a person who is physically affectionate and comfortable with their sexuality and personal in their sexual relating. And the 5th one is a person who is empathic and understanding. So those are what I have come to learn over the years, 5 main characteristics that we would like in a spouse or any good relationship. And of course, on the other side, said we should avoid potential partners who possess toxic personal qualities, such as manifestations of superiority and vanity. That's the narcissism. Those who are controlling, domineering, or overly submissive go the other direction. Hostile, rejecting, or cold. And of course, individuals that indicate addictive personality characteristics. So, in our sign out in front of our office, we do premarital counseling. I guess the Catholic Church calls it pre-Cana. They still do that, the pre-Cana, and they try to, I guess, look at all these issues and even determine if a couple is compatible, and if they have a lot of these characteristics, then these negative ones, then may just want to avoid. I guess that's the best way. Most people are not therapists, and to rectify a lot of these things, it takes a lot of therapy, and people have to be ready and willing to want to explore a lot of these things. And then, unfortunately, most people are not.
The other thing that you brought out, both of you brought out, the narcissism, right? And, so, the list that he just went over is certainly is anti-narcissism, right? I mean, you can't be on that list and be a really good narcissist, okay?
Incompatible. Yeah.
Incompatible. Okay, incompatible. So now the other question I have, and something's been bothering me about this, and this is for Frank Adamson. We see a lot of impulsivity with narcissists, okay? But in some we don't. We see real structured, methodical kind of planning out kind of things. Was this guy organized or did he act impulsively? Question for Frank Adamson, law enforcement expert. Frank, what do you see? You see an organized offender here or unorganized, impulsive offender?
Well, I think he was very organized. what we have. I mean, I go back and I look at that video and I think, he's got these beautiful children, a beautiful wife. He's got a house that's, well taken care of. And so and then I think, you see that picture where he's spending an hour with his truck, moving the family into the truck after he's killed them, forgetting that he has a camera pointing at that car. And I think of, I think in some ways he'd have what I would call a class A personality. He wants to do everything perfect, but he's not. It's not perfect. It's the opposite. But he was organized in what he was doing. He was organized in taking his time, not rushing through this thing. He had a plan. It was just a stupid plan, and that's how I see it.
Can I
Yes.
say something about that? We have to remember with this guy, this is his first murder, right? Like he didn't have a lot of practice, a lot of, I mean, he may have been a little bit, I don't know, maybe, I don't know this, you guys would know this. Would he have been a little bit uncomfortable? I mean, determined to do it, but yet a little bit maybe lacking in confidence or a little bit like, frantic or something that made him a little sloppy. I don't know. What do you all think?
Well, I'll defer to. I think there was he was in a certain state of anxiety, certain amount of anxiety, but definitely had made up his mind and was just living in the fantasy and thinking as soon as I get rid of my family, I can go on and live this wonderful, happy uh, life with this other woman. But Eddie and Frank, would you answer that?
Um, he probably had some once he put his plan into action. Um, I believe he killed his wife first. Am I right?
Yeah.
That he strangled her while
Yeah.
she was in bed, I think, sleeping. And I guess once he started, he couldn't stop. Of course, he's not gonna. That's what a lot of people. If you're a fairly normal human, you have a lot of trouble, thinking or believing you could do the children too. You can murder your children, maybe a wife, if there were some, unresolved issues there. But then when you go to the children, how do you do that? How do you can, what kind of you can say monster or whatever can do that? That's still extremely hard to believe and explain. But once the plan was put into action, I guess in his mind, he had no choice but to go all the way. And um, yeah, what your original question was, it organized? Yeah, it was fairly organized. Just really stupid. I guess they sound almost incompatible, but I guess you can be kind of fairly organized, but just make a lot of mistakes. Um, Frank may want to add on to something with that.
But the wind up is the guy's a monster for killing his kids. Does anybody else have anything else they want to say before we break and move on to the next topic? And we're going to be focusing on, the bankruptcy and everything else. What led up to this internalized rage that it got to the point where it just exploded, onto this family, and he killed them all for the sake of this relationship and this fantasy and the forbidden, the forbidden. I mean, it's so seductive. The forbidden can be so seductive. Anything else anybody wants to say before we move on to that?
I don't know if this would interest you, but in some of the comments he made later, in a later interview, and in that the letters to Sherlyn Cadle, who is someone who he communicated with, he kind of went back and affirmed how premeditated it was. I just want to confirm
Okay,
it.
yeah, you were talking about it. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he said he really had premeditated it, and in fact, the night before he was putting his kids to bed, he was thinking, well, this is the last night I'll be doing this. Yeah, he said, he admitted that he planned it, and it wasn't impulsive like he first said. So
Excellent point. All right, we're going to hold it right there, and we're going to come back to the temptation of the forbidden. So now we're talking about, the temptation of the forbidden. Okay, I mean, this guy is obsessed with this fantasy. I mean, supposedly she had sent pictures over to him. She wasn't completely naked in the pictures. She left something to be desired, from what I understand. And again, this is based on different things I've seen. All right. But sexually, I mean, it seemed like this guy was head over heels for this woman and to have this relationship. And we all know sitting here that even if he has this relationship, he can't outrun his personality. And sooner or later, something similar is going to happen. I'm not saying he's going to kill again. We can't predict who's going to kill him. We'll get to Dr. Reddy. Don't let me forget that at the end, because you said it's almost impossible in human behavior to really know if a human being has, the power to kill or not, or is willing to kill or not, has that kind of behavior in them. But what about this obsession, this addiction with this fantasy, and what kind of sexual motivation was involved in this for this guy? Because as I also read where his wife said, for the last week or so, he didn't even bother with her, didn't even touch her, didn't even kiss her, nothing. I mean, anybody want to talk about that?
sure.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead. You go.
No, you go.
Okay.
Ladies before gentlemen. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the wife, Shanann, had been texting her friends and worried because he had been distant. He had suddenly become kind of distant. He wasn't affectionate. They weren't hardly having sex. He wasn't talking, except for toward the end. He was saying that he wasn't happy. He didn't, and he said he didn't want the other child. He said he just wanted to keep, the daughters. Now I don't know if I'm sorry, Siri just answered me. We can talk about this later if you want. Like, I wonder if it was a male child. I don't know, that could have been some kind of trigger. But he had already made his mind up about, I don't know, the whole timeline. It says that he started dating Nicole in June, but Shanann was already pregnant. Like they would have known she was pregnant by the time the other two started dating. And so he was complaining toward the end that he didn't really want to have another child. And, Shanann got kind of desperate and was trying to do something and convince him to do something about the marriage. And, that's kind of how it ended up. But he was checked out. The way she described it, how he was in that last month was like completely checked out and spending a lot of time away from home. He was seeing this Nicole like at least 3 times a week, sometimes all day trips. I guess he was lying about it. So he was, like you said, he was obsessed.
Another warning sign that was showing up that he was just moving away in the relationship. He was cold. He was very cold to his wife, but yet he was very warm to the woman he was having an affair with, his girlfriend. Okay. And it seemed like, from what I read, he definitely was spending, more time with her and going places with her. So you have to wonder how far into this he got. And I assume he got into it pretty far, where this was going to be his new life and he was going to get rid of his old life. He was going to, as you said earlier, he was going to erase his old life. Unfortunately, that meant killing his family, annihilating his family. Okay. What say you, Eddie? What say you about that? I mean, you've certainly dealt with a lot of couples over the years and, seen mutual things, only they didn't murder each other. I mean, or their kids. I mean, they just broke up and went their separate ways. What do you see that's
Well,
off here?
certainly in the private practice, we don't see a lot of murders, I don't think. But I did work in a prison for 6 years, and I did have many cases that came in, of murdering their spouses and their children. A few family annihilators, but usually it's the family may single one child sometimes, and the whole family gets in on abusing and eventually killing one child. Um, this, Chris Watts, um, he's kind of an outlier in some ways. Yeah, he's very um, different. Um, I said I mentioned before about his formative years. He I would think that he's had some inadequate parenting, and probably was hurt a lot, whether that's real or perceived, but probably a lot of emotional pain in his life, and it gets very complicated. But people have these fantasy bonds, and they bring them into adult relationships, and they have all these fantasies of what adult relationships are supposed to be like, and they turn out not to be that way. So, and then you start to act out. He just acted out in the most pathological way possible. But people said they may have affairs, they may do other things, but it's thank God murder is rare. But it's very complicated, the psychodynamics for most people. Most people have less than perfect childhood experiences, and some people learn through life to cope better and manage better, and some don't. Some go down very sick, pathological, evil, you can say, illegal paths
Yeah,
to.
and I want to get back to that evil word because we're used to calling people narcissistic, sociopaths. We got a sociopath. There's psychopath. He's a psychopath. She's a psychopath. We very rarely hear the word he's evil. He's just flat out evil. Oh yeah, he's a narcissistic sociopath, psychopath, but he's just evil, man. Okay, Frank, just going over what Eddie was talking about and how most families react and everything and break up, and that may be the norm, and they don't go off killing each other or killing their kids or anything like that. But as a cop, as a man who's been in law enforcement for way over 30 years, Frank, did you put 30 years in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What
I know.
what I'm thinking is as you're talking about this thing and his narcissism, I'm thinking about the relationship that he's having with this girlfriend, and um, the fact that his wife is pregnant, then she is killed, and he doesn't understand that it's going to have any effect even on his relationship with the girlfriend. She appropriately dumped him at that time, but he just doesn't. I mean, I don't think he had a good relationship with this other woman from the start. It's all about him, and that goes back to that narcissism.
Yeah.
She didn't even know his wife was pregnant. So she heard that, I mean, she was gone, man. She was planning a wedding or looking at wedding dresses or something one day, looking at wedding dresses. I think it was the next day, man. She's gone. But Frank, as far as on the job, seeing, I've heard that domestics are the most dangerous for cops. That when a cop comes up on a domestic situation, a domestic fight going on between two people in a relationship, that can be the most dangerous. And I assume lots of times alcohol is involved in that too, or other drugs. But, Eddie talked about, getting along in relationships and that you've been on the other side of it. You're the one that had to show up, or people had to show up. I mean, you supervised over 200, maybe 300, hundreds of murders. I know you supervised, okay? And you were involved in. So when we talk about relationships and how relationships can get violent, how do you see it from a law enforcement point of view and from your experiences?
Well, obviously, it's rare for someone to kill his wife and children and try to get away with it, even from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, I handled hundreds of family fights, and I mean, they're irrational. They shouldn't happen, but they do happen. People have, especially males, tend to brutalize their wives inordinately, but they don't tend to kill them, and this is just so odd. And then to kill them and think you're going to have another good relationship after that seems to me just, again, wrong thinking.
Wrong thinking. Wrong narcissistic thinking. Okay, let's hold it there and we're going to come back. We're going to come back to warning signs. Did this guy show any warning signs at all on what he was going to do? This is what we're going to come back to. Dr. Eddie, you were talking about the different dynamics that go on in a good, wholesome relationship. What are some of the positive qualities in a good relationship? And what are some of the best efforts somebody in a relationship can put forward? And what their personality's like? Mary Ann, you're on the other side of this coin. Talk to me about warning signs. Dr. Eddie was talking about Mr. Right or Miss Right and having a relationship with them. I want you to tell us and tell the audience, what about Mr. Wrong? How to avoid Mr. Wrong? Stay away from Mr. Wrong or Miss Wrong. What do people looking for a relationship need to watch out for so they don't get into a situation with someone like this? But first of all, can we talk about any warning signs specifically we saw in this guy? Because this is very hard.
Okay. We don't have Shanann talking about any of this. But what's interesting is Nicole, the girlfriend, when she was texting to a friend, said, this seems too good to be true. That's a warning sign. That's a lot of times how that person presents, like just knight in shining armor, everything you'd want him to be or her to be, and more. So, if it seems like amazingly too good to be true, you're swept off your feet, that should be a question mark. If someone is obsessive, now you may or may not see that with somebody like Chris Rock, but of course, if someone gives you too much attention or calls you too much or just, wants to be with you, obsession is, an early sign of control, someone being controlled. And you can never tell who somebody is unless you give it time, like you were saying, Ed. You have to give it time to see how they do with things like disagreements and conflicts. If they're only good when things are going, just smooth and everything kind of, and you're very agreeable, don't, have to be careful not to be too agreeable because people are like that. You might start doing a dance with them, like kind of just accommodating their control. You have to keep your sense of self. You have to be disagreeable sometimes. You have to oppose. You have to have boundary, and see how that person does with the boundary or with the disagreement. If they show some form of distancing or anger, you probably have someone who's controlling, narcissistic, like that. If there's a conflict and they can't ever take responsibility for their part or be empathetic, big red flag. Big red flag. A person like that just can't do a relationship. And of course, if there's anything Listen to your intuition. If something seems off, something seems sketchy, an explanation doesn't ring true. There's a little suspicion of, that something doesn't sound right. There could be deceit going on. And from my experience with clients, they know it. You can sense it. If it's not there, you won't sense it. You won't sense that something is off. The person will feel kind of safe, and they mean what they say, and your body won't be kind of like reacting, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
According to what Ed was saying, give it time and see how a person does with those skills of empathy, of taking responsibility, working through conflict.
What say you, Dr. Eddie? Warning signs, warning signs.
Well, I'm just thinking, one of the core characteristics of narcissism is that they're very good. They're very, very generally, very skilled at, wearing that mask and coming off in certain ways, the honeymoon phase of relationships. So it's certainly not uncommon that people will not pick up on things in the early stages. They said, like Marion said, you have to be in a relationship a long time in many situations, and with many people, like how they interact with the family, how they interact with the friends. You have to know somebody in many different situations over a long period. But the narcissists, they're very, very good. They're charming, right? Most of them, as they say, they could shake your hand and steal your fingernails. Yeah. So
another warning sign might be if they don't have good relationships with their family, their own children, the parents. Sometimes
that's excellent. That's excellent.
Yeah. If they don't have friends.
That's very interesting, because if you don't care about what, just stop right there for saying it. If you said if they don't care too much about their children or pay attention to their children or whatever, right? Think of it like this: they don't care about their kids. How much do they really care about you? I mean, seriously, they might be camouflaging their feelings and hiding and wearing that narcissistic mask, but the bottom line is your kids are your kids, all right? And if you don't have a lot of love for your kids, how much love do you have for the person that's in a relationship with you? Go ahead, Marianne.
Just a couple other things that pop into mind. Like, you hear this all the time from women and men, both, that the person is like extremely sexually seductive. And this girl, Nicole, said that. She said, "My God, it's the best sex I've ever had." You hear that all the time. That's part of the seduction, the kind of getting what they want, the being very intensely focused on the person. And it was something else.
And we've heard that before.
Yeah.
We've heard that from many a woman too, right? There's no question about it.
And men.
Yeah, men too. Yeah. So anyway,
one other thing. That was the other
thing. Go ahead. Sure.
The lack of ability to kind of identify and share emotions is a sign, early sign.
Yeah, they can't express the feelings.
Yes, yeah. And Chris Ross was so flat, his affect.
And that's what we see, yeah. Yeah, that flatness, it seems it runs right with a lot of people that are sociopaths and have been violent. I've seen it many times with people I've interviewed. I've walked into, prisons, and my God, the guy's so flat. Do you have a pulse? It's like, I mean, this guy, can't get the feelings, number one. Go ahead. What else?
Yeah. There's it reminds there's an old psychoanalytic term. It's called Alexithymia. If you've ever heard of that, if you parse it out, it means it's like literally a inability to put emotions into words. Now, they may have a variety of feelings, but they just don't have an ability or the skill to put their feelings, the whole range of feelings that a human can have, but they may have them, but they just seem to have a restriction, and to put them into words, which is not good for human relations, to not have that skill. We even think there may be, biological roots to that too. If you look in the old psychodynamic, psychoanalytic literature, they do talk about it a lot, but it's kind of fallen, to the wayside a little bit. But I've seen it many times, people, and it's a shame because it's, if there's this biological hereditarian kind of cause for it, then how can you really treat it? There's like some really built-in deficiencies that people have. It's, said most people, they say they want very close relationships. Right? They say it.
Yeah.
They act it out. They do everything they get, but many people are just not equipped. They just don't have the proper skills. So they probably come from backgrounds that are very disturbed. The early childhood experiences. Most of us go through life trying to, with our defenses, trying to avoid pain. That's pretty a normal thing, trying to avoid emotional pain. But these defenses are acted out in our adult relationship, and that's what has to be addressed and penetrated. And this is what we do as therapists. Hopefully, if people are willing to stay in therapy and work through these things, and even if you want to go to a cultural thing, you think, look at many cultures of the world. Look at like the Muslim religion and the Taliban, like what their attitude is, let's say, toward women. We're talking mainly it's our culture here, or Western, but if you look in traditional cultures, a lot of these concepts where you could be killed, I guess, for even discussing them. Women's rights or personal space, and you could be, have serious consequences if you're talking about, rights for certain people. So that's on a global level, that's a real serious issue. So anybody wants to comment on that, but we're.
I just have one thing to add to what you were saying about the expressing of the emotions and the limited ability to do that. I just thought of, there's also another sign would be the limited ability to understand themselves, lack of insight. Like a lot of times, and even with Chris Watts, or probably you guys have seen this, like with killers a lot, like you ask them why they do something, they don't really know. They come up with something that's like, oh, okay. But you see that a lot even with people who are, callous, emotionally shut down, narcissistic, whatever, that if they don't really know why they do things, and they'll give like some kind of vague explanation or one that doesn't make sense. So that's another.
Yeah, that's.
They don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, finish.
No, go ahead. I was finished.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me because, you talk about that flat affect, and it just had me thinking there, again, going into various prisons and talking with various serial killers, and they really don't articulate their feelings very well at all. I mean, they are as flat as pancakes, and they just don't do it. And what seems to happen is, one guy called it the bothersome or nerves, whatever, negative thinking, whatever you want to call it, seems to build up because they are unable to, turn those negative feelings into language and articulate them and talk about them. So it's like, it's just building up and building up and building up and building up. And then all of a sudden, bang, out it comes. And, with this Chris Watts guy, and some people you've talked about. I mean, they don't seem to have character. Like they're very bland after they get what they want and they're done with their dance of insanity and wearing the mask of insanity and they've captured. I mean, they don't have relationships, right? They take hostages. you know so then they once they have their hostage, then they're looking for something else to like kind of re-stimulate them, and the best defense lots of time to feelings is an offense, and that offense is again just living in the fantasy and dreaming of the grandeur that's going to come. So is there anything else?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, no, no. Stay with it because we're going to end. So,
Ed very well described what healthy relationships are and how they work.
yeah.
People like this, and my theory is partly based on, I believe they have abuse. In fact, like all of the people that I work with, their partner has at least 90% of the time admitted to like early childhood, like pretty severe abuse, abandonment, neglect, death, medical trauma, humiliation, bullying, all those kinds of things, right? But so actually, the only way the way they learn how to relate is power victim. They don't know how to it's not safe. You don't trust people enough. It's not safe to be yourself. It never was. That probably closed down very early on. So the way, and they were victimized. So then as an adult in a relationship, they will take on the form of control, the role of control. And even if it's not apparent at the beginning, eventually it's going to, that is the role they're going to take. They're not going to be the victim. They're going to be the person with the control.
Yeah,
That's how they relate. So that's that's what you're in for with a person like that. There might be one or two like really rare exceptions. And who was it who worked with Gary Ridgway, the
Frank.
River? Frank, Judith, his wife. That was a really rare situation where he stayed with her for a long time, appeared to be kind of, like a normal, nurturing step grandfather or whatever. But if you read her biography, she was like a total slave. She never, there was never an argument, there was never a disagreement. She pretty much just, did what he said. Very compliant, and that's the way it had to be.
And he was still continuing to kill, right, Frank?
Right. Right.
Did you hear her talk about Ridgway, Frank?
I was thinking about, the sociopath often is charismatic. And so to determine ahead of time that this may not be a good relationship, if this person happens to be a narcissistic psychopath or sociopath, you may not be able to tell. I mean, I think look at all the people that followed, fell victim in the Jonestown thing. That guy was tremendously charismatic, and people liked him quickly. And so sometimes it's really difficult to determine that this guy isn't a nice guy, or this person isn't a nice person.
Yeah, and Gary Ridgway, I guess what you were alluding to, Marianne, was Gary Ridgway's pretty flat. I mean, he's, he had that flatness about him too, so you got two kinds. You got your megalomania, charismatic character out there, right? And we've got plenty of them. And then we also have this Henry Lee Lucas, Gary Ridgway, kind of flat. Oh, I'm a real nice guy, but the anger's building up or whatever. I'm fantasizing killing you or whatever. I mean, Yeah, everybody's different, I guess. I don't think one size fits all. But one thing we do know is that if you control, you don't have to trust, right? I mean, so is that kind of like a safety net? If I can control you, I don't have to worry about trusting you because I can't trust you. I can't trust anybody, right? So I've got to control. And that goes part and parcel with the narcissism, pathological narcissism. Correct me if I'm wrong, Eddie, but the is it Alfred Adlerian theory that anybody who believes they're superior is really feeling inferior? I mean, how's that go?
Yeah, that's most of the theory, Adlerian theory, is about superiority, inferiority, and you know, we develop these thoughts and feelings at a young age, and carry them out. Um, but yeah, people who do believe they are superior and are better, smarter than the average bear kind of thing. They usually, when you scratch away the surface, they usually have a lot of inadequacy feelings,
Mm-hmm.
and they aren't in touch with them. That's where hopefully therapy can help out. But the majority, as I mentioned before, the majority of people don't go to therapy. They don't access, maybe from a variety of reasons, they don't come in, and they're just not going to get better. They just go through life. Like I said, most people on the surface they say they really want a very long, loving, fantastic relationship, but many people just are not equipped to do it. Um, I've had clients, like some males in my office, that when they come in and they tell me what they want in a woman, all the things that they fantasize or have to have in a woman, I said, well, you're not going to find that in our culture. You better move to the Middle East somewhere and try to find a woman who may be, groomed to be, very subservient.
Subservient, yeah.
Yeah. And I said, because they're serious. They're not kidding. They want this and that. And they want barefoot pregnant kind of thing, and that's their fantasy. And they've had a lot of relationships, but when those stuff that their fantasies come out, with most American-born raised women in Western culture, they're going to run away. They're not going to tolerate or accept that. Um, some may do it in the short term, but it kind of gets destroyed in the long term. So,
Well, does anybody else have anything they want to say? Because we're going to end here. I Go ahead. Anybody?
just say if the I know, did we answer some fundamental questions about what what caused Chris Watt to do what he did? Um, as mentioned before, we um, predicting human behavior is a very difficult thing, very difficult, especially when you said the word narcissism 100 times, especially if someone is truly a narcissist. And I know there are different types of narcissists. There are different levels. Um, but because of the description of that disorder, they're charismatic, charming, and very hard to detect. So, for anybody out there, the characteristics I mentioned before, that's a good outline, a good starting point. But yeah, I said, Marianne said we mentioned it should take a long time, ideally, to really get to know someone, and use your own instincts. I think it's been said women have better instincts than men. I don't know, because they operate with both sides of their brain, the left and right hemisphere. Their corpus callosum is a lot stronger and thicker than men's. Men are more left-brained. Women tend to use both sides, so their intuition tends to be a little better. So I would say use it.
That's because they've had to run from men all their lives. So anyway, the bottom line is to our audience now. To our audience, the bottom line is, if any of you out there are in a bad relationship for any reason, and you want to contact, I'm sorry, if you want to contact Marianne Glenn, go to destructiverelationshipshelp.com for Marianne Glenn, who's, as you can see here, is a true expert. Go to destructiverelationships.help.com. Marianne Glenn, destructiverelationships.help.com. I got it right. Okay. Anything else, guys, before we break? With nothing else to be said, I want to thank our audience. I want to thank you all for having us in your homes, for viewing us. We truly appreciate it. We can't thank you so much for all the subscriptions. Please continue to subscribe. Please continue to comment. As you know, we go over all our comments. We always will get back to you if there's a question. We try our best to get back to you. Most importantly, make it a great day and stay safe out there. Thank you so much.